Hello and welcome to the Urban League Vice for You virtual series. Today's webinar, Safely Returning to the Workplace, What You Need to Know, is brought to you by the Entrepreneurship Center program and the CARES Act for Small Business. And now, please welcome Senior Vice President for Economics and Housing Programs for the National Urban League, Cy Richardson.
Thanks very much, Simone. Colleagues, my name is Cy Richardson, Senior Vice President for Programs for the National Urban League, and I'm very glad to be with you here today. Related to this topic, what we have come to understand over the past weeks and months is that businesses and employers can play a key role in preventing and slowing the spread of COVID within the workplace. Indeed, my colleagues and I at the National Urban League, based in New York here, are grappling with this very topic ourselves as a business entity. However, we have come to affirm that our preparedness, response, and control plans should take into account workplace factors such as feasibility of social distancing in the workplace, the ability to stagger employee shifts, which we're working on today, the degree to which employees interact with the public in person, the feasibility of accomplishing work by telework, which has been very productive over the last year, geographical isolation of the workplace, whether employees live in congregate housing or the proportion of employees at increased risk of severe illness, and policies regarding sick leave for staff and priority for continuity of operations and so forth. But we also must be informed, alert, and adaptive. Employers should certainly consider the level of COVID-19 disease transmission in their communities as they heed this advice. As an employer, if your business operations were interrupted, resuming normal or phased activities presents an opportunity to update your COVID-19 preparedness response and control plans. At the very least, we believe all employers should implement and update as necessary a plan that does three things: that it's specific to your workplace, that it identifies all areas and job tasks with potential exposure to COVID, and includes control measures to eliminate or reduce such exposures. Please heed this advice. I cannot wait to hear more insights and best practices from our expert speakers. I'll now pass the baton to my colleague, Stephanie Devon, who oversees our small business assistance work and is our chief strategist in this space. Stephanie?
Thank you, Cy, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's my distinct honor to welcome you and to introduce our dynamic speakers for today's program. First, Nanette Aguirre, Greenberg Traurig. Nanette concentrates on private funds, alternative investments with an emphasis on derivatives and structured products and corresponding regulation. Her experience includes negotiating all forms of synthetic trading, including international derivative, repos, and prime brokerage enhanced leverage arrangements with global institutions. And that's a mouthful. She's very experienced. You're going to hear more from her. She also works closely with emerging private fund managers to strategize their launch, trading, and ongoing compliance. Additionally, she regularly advises on regulatory issues affecting the derivatives market, including without limitation Dodd-Frank and related cross-border regulation. She's an active member of the alternative investment community, and she sits on the board of the Florida Alternative Investment Association and Minorities in Restructuring and Alternative Investments. She also works closely with other MWBE and emerging manager associations. I would like to welcome Nanette. You're going to hear great things from her. She's a shareholder at Greenberg Traurig and has a lot of experience in the field. And our next speaker is April Simpkins, representing Society for Human Resource Management, also known as SHRM. April is duly certified HR professional with 30 years of executive level human resources experience. So you can see we have two very experienced speakers. April is an HR consultant and chief human resources officer for Total HR, a human resources services firm focused on supporting the HR needs of small to mid-sized businesses. She has helped more than 1,000 business owners shape and develop their human capital. April's a board member of both the York County Regional Chamber and the SC Small Business Development Centers, an SBDC. She's the chapter chair for the Charlotte affiliate of the Women's Presidents Organization, known as WPO. That's a nonprofit membership organization for women presidents, CEOs, and managing directors of privately held multi-million-dollar companies. She's also the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for Greenville SHRM. April has received many awards and honors for her business acumen. And so I'd like to welcome both April and Nanette, our dynamic speakers for today. And now I'm going to turn the program over to them. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm very excited about today's topic. It has already been a year, if you can believe it. Thank you for Stephanie's introduction. I think just a couple of things I would add about myself and the firm. Again, my name is Nanette Aguirre. I am a corporate partner with international and full service law firm Greenberg Traurig. We are the largest law firm in the United States. We operate across 44 offices. We're in the US, Europe, Latin America, the Middle East, and Asia. I don't think I left anything out. We also have over 2,000 attorneys. And one of the things that I'm proudest of is that half of our attorneys are women. And the second thing that I'm extremely proud of is that we have the highest number of African American and Latino attorneys. So just a little more information about us. So before we get started, it's important to note that what we're going to be discussing today is solely informative and nothing should be deemed legal advice. And so with that, welcome April. As mentioned, April Simpkins is joining us. She is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Total HR. And so April, here we are and welcome.
Yes, thank you. And, I want to add just a couple of extra points about us, just to give some context to the information that I want to share. Last year, when COVID hit, we worked with a number of businesses in many different industries, and we were proud to walk shoulder to shoulder with a lot of our clients through what was for all of us uncharted territory. So a lot of the information I'm going to share is based on my collective experience and knowledge, not just over the course of my career, but in helping organizations through different industries manage and kind of redesign in the backdrop of what was a global pandemic.
Agreed. So let's start high level, April. We're at the 1 year mark. Let's start by describing what it means to run a business today.
Wow. It's so different. Honestly, I can think of many big changes that occurred for businesses. First of all, our workspace changed. Depending on your industry, if you were in food service, you might have found yourself closing or trying to make this pivot to delivery and takeout. Some other changes in manufacturing, for example, with trying to do your job while you're wearing a mask. And many of us know that you want to stay away from things that are loose or that can fall or drop. And now you've got to wear some kind of covering, perhaps, depending on your organization. Also, one thing that I did not realize, but learned very quickly with wearing masks for some, we depend on reading lips. And I saw this come out earlier this year, last year, with a large retailer that really took it on the chin because their people were wearing masks and some couldn't lip read. And those who are hearing impaired, could not lip read. And so we had to make pivots, I think, as businesses and organizations. Again, with education, if your business is in learning, you had to very quickly shift from what might have been an in-person setting to something that was remote. And I can speak firsthand to that. One of my children learns remotely, and he relies on the interaction of teachers. And so we often think, well, the teacher is just going to be seen, but in front of the screen. But for him, he needed the interaction of an instructor looking at his work when he got stumped, to come over and help him get unstuck in the moment. And that's something that we lost, and certainly became a huge change, I think, and shift in our education system. Medical, many doctors had to learn how to do doctor visits virtually. And I know, how do you transition that? And for many of our physicians, they have support. There's someone who is helping them with taking notes and recording data, and now they've got to learn to do some of those things on their own. And so I think some of the biggest changes I saw truly was in the business owner's ability to pivot, to become innovative, and to think outside of the box to keep their business going.
Absolutely. In fact, I would add two things. Whether you are operating a cross-border business or a local business, you quickly learned to plan ahead for delays. Whether it's the distribution of goods or how your staff is navigating within even just a smaller staff, or managing having small ones at home while schools were not yet open. So certainly planning ahead for delays, those bottlenecks in operations, those pain points, and setting expectations for clientele. You might have worked very quickly in the past, but now inevitably there are going to be delays. And maybe the second thing I would add to that, for the audience, people in the audience who are entrepreneurs and develop business, how do you plan for those dinners? How do you plan for those coffee meetings? Now it's important to stay connected, but be sensitive to the boundaries of the people that you're scheduling with. Not everyone's comfortable meeting in person. And so use the resources you have. Case in point, we're on a Zoom meeting, a Zoom discussion, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how so many businesses have moved into working remotely. And what would you say or advise in the context of maintaining safeguards and productivity?
Good, honestly, good question. For many businesses, the work from home was abrupt. There was very little time to almost strategize around it. I think, with regards to safeguards, I'm not an IT professional, nor have I played one on TV, but I think we all deal in some levels of technology. From an HR standpoint, one caution I would add to business owners in the work from home is the security of the information that is being seen and viewed on the computer. You may want to remind your employees who do work from home with a work computer that the information that is confidential must be kept that. And so make sure that they are working in a place where their screen may not be visible or easily visible by passersby, even if they are family members, especially if you're working from a coffee house or someplace else. Also, I think about so many companies that began to leverage technology and the issues of hacking and ransomware really being elevated last year. And I think connecting with IT professionals with regards to safeguarding is so huge. I remember last year reading the story of Garmin. They make fitness brand, devices. People wear Garmin watch to go running. I know myself personally, I tend to be more Fitbit, but whatever floats your boat. I can tell you this, though, if my Fitbit is not charged, I'm not going running that day. It's just that important to me to track my steps and what I'm doing. But Garmin was hacked and had to deal with a ransomware issue. And so all of their products went offline. And, I think of Garmin in the context of, some kind of watch or device, but Garmin runs a GPS system that helps small planes. And so when their system went down because it was hacked, not only were they impacted internally, but externally, those who use their service were impacted. So the importance of safeguarding your technology is really at a fevered pitch, not just last year, but now people have become more savvy in that. Also, I would say check with your business insurance provider. You may need to carry some insurance to cover that potential, or you may just want to keep your business from being vulnerable. And a last bit I would add on safeguarding is the use of open Wi-Fi. Everybody doesn't work from home. Some people went to places that were hotspots or, a coffee shop, and the Wi-Fi may be open, and that could lead to potential hacking of your data. So certainly remind employees about that. With regards to productivity, leverage technology if you can. I know I speak to safeguarding, but technology can really be a game changer and a lifesaver when you've got people working remotely. There's lots of productivity apps. There's Slack, Trello, Monday.com, and those are just some off the top of my head that I can think of. also talk about the use of personal devices when we're talking about safeguards and productivity. For many businesses, that became the option. People just, employees using their cell phones, and now they're kind of accessing client data on their personal device or using their personal laptop and computer, which means there may be other people who are using that. And again, leaving you maybe vulnerable to hacks or some kind of cyber attack. So think through those things when you're thinking through safeguarding your information and maintaining productivity.
Agreed. In fact, I would also add for the employers in the audience, you might want to consider requiring a shredder at home. It's inevitable that your staff will have access to confidential data, and to the extent that it is printed, you want to make sure that it's discarded in an appropriate way. And the best thing to do is to require a shredder at home. And another thing, try to avoid emailing confidential information to a personal email address. If you have to do that, redact the information that's sensitive. And the last thing that I would say to your point, April, too, is confidential conversations cannot be had at Starbucks.
So true.
If you have to have the call and you can't have it at home, make the appropriate arrangements with when you schedule those calls. Maybe it's when the children are at school, or make arrangements to maybe have childcare while you're having those calls, and schedule those calls at an appropriate time within a private space, not at Starbucks for sure, or any public place for that matter.
100% agree. 100% agree. And also as a last note on the productivity side, be sure to talk to your employees and colleagues about time management. It's hard to do. And sometimes when you're working from home, and it's not the same. Remote work today isn't the same as it was 5 or 6 years ago, when you felt like working from home meant what changed was logistics. And now it feels like your home came into your office. And so you're trying to balance doing your work while also maintaining things at home. And so I think reminders on productivity and time management are also very helpful.
Agreed. So generally speaking, when it comes to multi-state businesses, they're facing challenges with respect to best practices because orders vary across cities, states, and on the federal level. What are some resources that you would recommend to the audience with respect to navigating in this particular instance?
I am so glad you brought that up, and especially in the backdrop of remote work. Because if you are located in a city or town that borders another state, and your employees were sent home or are going to be sent home to work, you may have to comply with employment regulations in that state because now they live there and work there. So I'm not saying that applies every time. Certainly, I'm going to give you some resources, but you want to keep that in mind as we talk through some of the reasons why you want to know what's going on in other states. Also on a federal level. So when I look at some resources that are available, the one that comes first top of mind is the Department of Labor. There's a federal Department of Labor, and then each state has a Department of Labor equivalent. And that is going to help you tremendously with trying to balance working within the confines of regulation and also dealing with people challenges that you might face. Things like COVID-19, unemployment, compensation. Are they being paid for that time? And if someone is working by the hour and they are working from home, and tracking that time is something that you have to do. And the information and tips on how to do that can be found on that DOL.gov site. And we're going to show some of these resources towards the end of the presentation. So if you don't catch some of the names, just know we're going to flash that up on the screen so that you'll have that. You can do a screenshot and then certainly add that information to your dashboard. Another site would be SHRM.org, which stands for Society for Human Resources Management.org. You'll get lots of information on best practices and strategies. And Nanette, I used to tell people all the time when they were trying to figure things out with employees, I'm like, stop trying to make sense of it. There sometimes is no sense in the law. You just have to know it and abide by it, right? But when it comes to employees, you've thrown in the human aspect. And so how do we balance this, but still maintain our business culture and some continuity? And I think SHRM does a great job of introducing that. So if you're trying to think, what is the best way to approach this? Or how do I tell my employees to wear different type of clothing when they're doing these Zoom calls so they still represent your business well? That kind of verbiage could be found on that site where they've got sample policies and training and webinar. A lot of the information there is free. Another one, a great resource to add to your dashboard is cdc.gov. The Centers for Disease Control, lots of information there. And, interestingly enough, I thought that was going to be full of a lot of medical and technical jargon. And to my pleasant surprise, it was not. There was a lot of great information. And as I mentioned at the top, when we began talking, different industries and different businesses are impacted in different ways based on what has gone on in 2020. And if you're thinking to yourself, hey, all of this seems to apply to professional services, but I'm in manufacturing or I'm in retail or I do hair, the CDC has broken it down by industry to give you tips and pointers on things like cleaning up the workspace, sanitizing things, washing hands, and just a variety of things. And I love that on that site, they also speak to the employee, how to deal with stress, how to manage and balance home and work. And so it's not just for employers, you can also direct your employees to that site as well. And the last resource I would say is to add an employment law attorney to your dashboard. And I often talk about the dashboard, where you got your finger on the pulse of things. And, employment law is so different. I laugh sometimes. My husband is an attorney and he's in commercial real estate, but the number of people who will ask him about speeding tickets would blow your mind, right? And he's like, that's not my area. That, I'm guessing right along with you. And so employment law is the same thing. You really want to have someone on your team who is an employment law attorney. And I know, Nanette, I'm sure you'll share lots of resources that you have that are just available where people can go to your site and see this information. And so stay connected and plugged in that way.
I'm glad you mentioned that because at the top of our chat today, I mentioned how large Greenberg Traurig is. And a year ago, we created something called the COVID Task Force, because there are so many different elements to the pandemic, to remaining productive, healthy, all of the above. And so we have a sizable COVID task force. And on the list of resources that you'll be putting up at the end of our chat today, you'll have our link, which provide news alerts, and it's a free resource, and it'll cover everything from stimulus packages to healthcare to employment matters. And so I think that it's a helpful tool for a quick tidbit on what's happening.
I would absolutely agree. And I would say for each of the resources that you'll see, when I say add them to your dashboard, each of those sites has got a news tab where you can read straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, what's going on. And you can make some of those calls on what applies to your business. They also have social media feeds. And so get plugged in there as well. So you get information in real time. Again, it's going to help you make real-time decisions for your business as we move through 2021.
Absolutely. And I've heard from several people that they are feeling overwhelmed. Where do I go for information? How do I, make the time to cover everything? And so one thing that I would also say is develop a macro and micro approach to how you tap into these resources. As you mentioned, on a macro level, the CDC website. On the CDC website, you will find things like variants, the effectiveness data surrounding the vaccines, demographics, information about the distribution of vaccines. All of that is available to you on a macro level. And then on a micro level, I'm in New York, and so for us, it's newyorkcity.gov. And on newyorkcity.gov, you have access, and I'm sure every city has its equivalent, right? You have access to information like the percentage of alcohol you need to have in your disinfectant as you start to open your business, or the guidelines across, different zones. We can't forget that if you're in a red zone versus an orange zone or a yellow zone, that has its own set of guidelines. And that information is readily available on a micro level on your city's .gov website. So switching gears a bit, we probably touched on this, but it's worth diving into. As a follow-up question, as businesses begin to return to the office, what are some general tips?
I've got a few. Let me start first with maybe some policies. Even whether you're large or small, I will say this, many organizations have policies. Some are in writing and some just aren't. We don't typically write a policy on which door to use when entering a business. We just understand that as an unwritten policy. So I would say to revisit your policies. For example, visitors in the workplace. Before 2020, that may not have been a problem for some. Have people wait out in the lobby might fill up. There may be some businesses that don't mind relatives or friends coming back to someone's office or workstation. And now you probably need to revisit that. And so as you bring people back into the office, right at the top of my list is to redefine what normal looks like. And as part of that, explain visitors in the workplace. Also, time off. For many in 2020, you didn't take a lot of vacation time off. One, so many things were closed, so there may not have been as many options to travel and go see things. Also, people would take time off to, for example, go to see the doctor. And as I mentioned, that's something now that's just an hour maybe to dial in and see your doctor virtually, or to have the cable guy come over. Now you don't need a half day. You're right there. So for many employees, they banked a lot of PTO time over the course of 2020. As an employer, might be time to revisit that. Did you allow people to carry it over? Are you going to continue to allow people to carry it over? For some, as they open their businesses back up, they may need to create blackout periods, times when you say, hey guys, nobody's going to take vacation. We're going to have our doors wide open. It's the holiday season. It's Memorial Day. It's 4th of July. We're doing blackouts. So right now is a time as you reopen the office, some things have changed, especially around time off. You might need to mention that. Meal breaks, if you have a break room, people may now need to sit at their desk and eat, which for them was different. So if that is the case because of social distancing, revisit that policy. People may need to sit at their desk. And by the way, if they sit at their desk and they begin working, that may be considered work time. So again, you want to visit some of those resources I mentioned and strategize how you want to do that. Another issue around bringing people back to work is giving some folks time to reacclimate their schedules. I know for me, when I would drive last year in 2020, it was like a Sunday afternoon. It could be 5 o'clock on a Friday and like the highway was bare. And so to now return to work, I got to remember what that traffic was like, because everybody might be returning to work and schools might be open. And so give people some rope to be human. And honestly, it could just be traffic. That's why they're a little late that day. Maybe give them a little bit of some leeway. Extra time to ride the elevator. Because of social distancing, we don't cram the elevators anymore. So if people have to ride the elevator to get to your office, you may need to add a little extra time, give them a little extra rope, and allow people to readjust. That also goes with clocking in. If you're an employer with one central clock where everyone's got to punch it, you might need to stagger start time so that you don't end up with a large group of people clustered around the time clock. Also, allow people time to leave their desk to wash their hands. Maybe you have hand sanitizing stations or hand sanitizer that you've passed around. Be sure to do that, to add to that level of cleanliness and care. Remind employees not to share equipment. It's so simple and easy for us to walk past someone's desk and grab that stapler and clip it, or a tape dispenser. Remind them that we're not going to do that. Allow them some, wipes and other things so that they can keep their workstations a little cleaner. Wipe down the copier if everybody's using it, the buttons. All of those things must be thought through and a plan developed as people begin to return to the office.
Absolutely. It's definitely in the details. And something you mentioned that I do want to repeat for purposes of this discussion would be to refer to the COVID-19 return to work playbook, because it categorizes guidelines across specific industries. So if you're running a hotel, it's this. If you're running a real estate brokerage office, it's the following. And so again, going to that macro level, that it's certainly worth looking at. And then again, going to NewYorkCity.gov, at least in our case, we're sitting in New York, because there's countless resources and information surrounding New York City paid and sick leave guidance, employee privacy matters. As you start to go back to work, you want to be sensitive to the new norm.
Right.
And certainly reiterating that red, yellow, and orange designation for your zone. Where is your office? So you want
exactly
that you can open, and you can open in the way you were intending to open. So
exactly.
I would reiterate all of those things. So April, for employees who prefer to work remotely until after the pandemic, what are some general tips that you would offer?
Great question. There's a few things that I would say. I'm going to start again with some policies. I mentioned very briefly the dress code. And so just like we're showing up for a call, for a video call right now, you might want to set some guidelines. People are at home, they may be comfortable wearing comfortable clothing, but if that's not the culture that you want to represent for your business, then you may need to just remind people that, preferably from the waist up, you still dress accordingly and look prepared for a business call. Also have employees be mindful of what can be seen in their camera. Again, we're stepping into someone's home, and it might be just great art for them, but it might be offensive to someone else. And so we want to remind them, if possible, to use some kind of background. If that's not available, then to, again, be mindful of what can be seen inside of the camera. Alcohol and drug policies. There are times when people, again, might be relaxing at their desk. If they're in their home, it's lunchtime, they're working, and they may want to have a beer or something to that effect. You want to remind employees of your expectations when it comes to that. For example, there are some people who would never smoke in the office, but they would smoke in their home. And again, if they're going to be visible on a camera, remind them of what your expectations are when they are engaged to work. Another point that I want to make is that workers' compensation covers employees in the workplace, but workers' comp also covers workers who are at home working. So talk to your insurance provider about how you can strategize around that. You may be able to use a safety checklist to remind people to use ergonomic seats. If they don't have it, are you willing to provide that? Watch out for carpal tunnel. Remind people to get up and move their body a little bit. Sitting and being sedentary is like the new smoking as far as your health is concerned. So remind employees to get up and maybe move around a little. Another point that I want to make is with the disabled community. And in the workplace, depending on how many employees you have, you may be obligated to provide a reasonable accommodation. And that, again, is going to transfer home. And so if we have someone who has a disability who needs some kind of an accommodation so that they can do their job, you may need to provide that for them. A great resource to find out more information on how to do that would be a website called askjan.org. And again, we're going to flash that on the resources page, askjan.org. Not only do they have tons of great information on that site, but they've also got a team of professionals who will talk with you on the phone on what you might need to do, whether that's providing, as I said, an ergonomically correct chair, or helping someone with a screen magnifier, whatever that is, you'll get great information at that resource. Also, I would add, with people working remotely, we get Zoom fatigue. You know, before 2020, it was nothing to just pick up the phone. And when I'm talking to someone on the phone, I don't have to be camera ready. I'm just talking on the phone. And I think the CEO of IBM put out an amazing pledge. And I would encourage you to just do a quick Google search of the CEO of IBM's pledge. It has some great points that we can remember as employers when dealing with our employees. Things like taking care of yourself, just reminding them. When the pandemic hit, employers were affected, but so was every individual employee. And I think as employers, we sometimes learn how to put on that face because we know everyone is looking back at us. But when you're the employee, your stress and worry is very different. One of the things that I noticed with working remotely is when I'm in the office, I can see my team. I can walk past someone's office and I can tell when they look troubled. And I can either share a motivational word or have a conversation, but I can see them where they are and meet them where they are. When we are all working remotely, I don't get that. So they are isolated and I am isolated and I don't know always how to support them. So just remember that they are all human and it's okay to not be camera ready. And there are times when they really need to take care of themselves.
I certainly agree with that. And one thing that I would offer up as a reminder to both employers and employees, because the working remotely is something that many of us had to learn overnight. You know, how to remain productive, how to check in, how to sort of survey how well you're performing based on the standards of your employer. And there is a great link on the, at least for us, NewYorkCity.gov, called the Toolkit. And it's for helping to provide guidance for free apps or tools for file sharing, signing documents, transmitting documents, encrypting messages. And so for a lot of for a lot of people in the audience, they may be struggling with, well, how can I do this quickly and afford it, right? Because it's an overnight cost that maybe we weren't putting into projections. And so I think the toolkit on, at least for us, NewYorkCity.gov gives some helpful guidance there. So moving on, we've spent some time, April, talking about working remotely versus returning to the office, safeguards, productivity, resources. But now what I'd like to do is talk about the cultural aspect of operating a business during a pandemic.
You know, one of the major changes that I noticed with employers is that the pandemic really blurred the lines between personal and professional lives. And I think that affected the culture of many organizations, where some people are very private, that's just who they are. Nothing wrong with that. They're now being forced to talk about or deal with their personal lives while they manage their professional life. When the pandemic hit, many students went home from kindergarten right on up. And so that coworker who you never knew had children because he or she didn't talk about it is now having to talk about being away from work or having to balance working with their children and also getting their job done. People had to talk about ailing parents, their own health, which, by the way, might be protected under HIPAA if you're an employer and someone is sharing that information. But they're having to talk about their own health, maybe issues that make them more vulnerable, and that's why they need time away from work. People are dealing with death and bereavement and all of these other things. And I think it really blurred that line, was one of the major shifts I noticed inside of culture. And many employers had to learn to be very empathetic and supportive of their employees and treat them as people and not just, you know, kind of a means to an end or a wheel in a cog. And so I think for employers, really reaching into some resources helped a lot. EAPs, employee assistance programs, some of those are offered through medical plans, counseling services. Those are the kinds of things that helped support employees while also allowing them to be able to do their job. Another thing I noticed is that calls became a little more abrupt. Like there wasn't the camaraderie, the water cooler talk. I'm dating myself, but the water cooler talk was gone. And there's a synergy that comes with that depending on your business. I thought it was interesting. Many years ago, Marissa Mayer, who took over as the CEO of Yahoo, and this was back in like 2011, 2012, Yahoo is a tech company where everyone worked remotely for the most part. A good number of people did. And then she called everybody back because she said, there's a synergy that happens in these impromptu meetings. And if your culture is dependent on that kind of spontaneous innovation, it gets lost. And you've got to figure out culturally how to recapture that remotely. And therein lies your challenge for today almost. But figuring out how to bring that back inside of your organization, whether that is allowing small groups, virtually, smaller groups that can really talk about things other than just work. I saw a lot of remote happy hours that people would do, which I thought was really neat. One thing that we did in our organization was develop the icebreaker before our staff meetings, and we allowed different people to do different things. And we first did this right at the shutdown, and everybody, is working remotely, and people are worried. We were all a little stressed, and we had this virtual scavenger hunt with a list of things that hit the screen, and everybody went around your house and you found really cool things like a record album or a CD disc and baby picture. We came back and we were all sharing these things, and it seems so simple, but it was the first time in weeks that I had seen the collective of my coworkers laughing and smiling and just being jovial. And so I think that's important that we not forget that it is part of the workplace culture. We have to figure out ways to contain that.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. One other thing that I would say as far as culture goes is to learn from 2020 and put together a good crisis management plan. Look at the things that happened in your organization, things that blindsided you, things you weren't thinking about, things you heard in the news and went, oh my goodness, I hope that never happens to us. Make your plan. Many organizations would have someone who would become ill. And if someone becomes ill over the weekend, they're not coming in on Monday. Mm-hmm. And if that person is the person who managed payroll, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So think through, how do we address this? Have a crisis management plan.
Absolutely. So we are just about out of time. So I would just ask for your final takeaways. What have we not talked about that you'd like to share with the audience?
I would add just a couple of things, especially right before we go into Q&A. One, what got you here won't get you there. Marshall Goldsmith said that. So you have to stop thinking the way it used to be and really start here moving forward and go, this is the way things are going to be, and just kind of redesign your strategic plan, short-term and long-term. So important. Look at what has happened and develop a plan moving forward.
Absolutely.
Hi, April and Nanette, thank you so much for this really robust presentation. As of right now, we don't have any questions in the chat. I have something from Fatima that is thanking the both of you for the time and the good information. So it sounds like you both are pretty much on point. I don't know if we want to leave a little bit of time for more questions or if there's anything else perhaps on the agenda. Or are we ending early? Not sure yet, but I'll give a few more minutes if there's anybody that wants to pop something into the chat.
Sure, no problem. We'll wait a few more minutes.
Okay, great.
Sure. And while we wait, I'll just expand on your last question on some takeaways. Again, I want to remind people to update your dashboard. I'm going to flash those resources on the screen. so that you can see those while I share a couple of thoughts and we wait for any questions to come in. Let's see, I've got that right here. Perfect. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Great. So those are some of the resources that we mentioned as we shared today. Get those added to your dashboard. Another thing that I would say is keep your finger on the pulse of engagement with your employees. You'll notice if they become unusually quiet, they're not sharing as much, they seem withdrawn. Retention is going to be huge in 2021. We are seeing a lot of movement through recruiting companies. You don't think people are looking, but people are working remotely and they can do those interviews remotely and you just don't know. So you've got to really up your game on keeping your employees engaged and connected. And I mentioned SHRM.org. They're listed here as a resource, has great information on engaging your employees and how to keep them connected to your business so that hopefully you don't lose key people as you try to amp things back up in 2021.
And our COVID task force link is the last one there. It's fairly easy to navigate, but again, if you have any trouble or any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. April's information is also on the screen for purposes of LinkedIn, and we are happy to answer any questions should they arise after today's discussion.
Absolutely.
Yes, April, and then, I'm sorry, there are no questions in the chat box. Mavis Turner is also very thankful of the support provided. I'll let you finish your point and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. I was just going to say another resource. I am a huge reader. I love reading books. And there's a book written by two ladies several years ago who started off in Best Buy, and they were in the HR department. They wrote a book about a work model called Remote Only Work Environment, and it focuses a lot on goals. And so if you've got employees who are working remotely, as an employer, it will teach you how to look at their production from a goal timeline perspective and not tasks. One of the most common questions I was asked last year was, how do I know if they're working, April? Everybody's remote. How do I know if they're working? And that is because their mindset is stuck in presenteeism, must be at work to work. And now that is not really the case. Work is what you do and not where you go. And the book these two ladies wrote about the results only work environment really did a good job of addressing that. So if you're stuck thinking, how do I know that, April? That's a great book to start with. The name of the book, ironically, is called Why Work Sucks and How to Fix It. And again, it's all about working remotely. And from an employer's perspective, how do I know that they are working when I can't see them? Great book.
And great title.
Right?
Yes. Okay. We do have one question that came in, and I think after this question, we will have both April and Annette just close out.
Okay.
All right. So the question is properly disinfecting touch points. And this is coming in from Fatima. I think she's just curious about what's the best way to just make sure those touch points are clear and safe.
You said properly cleaning touch points?
Properly disinfecting touch points.
Thank you. I don't have anything specific to tell her. I will say that the proper way to do that is on the CDC website. Would you agree with that, Nanette? Great information on how to keep those surfaces and other things clean.
And I also mentioned that the information afforded on this particular matter, whether on the CDC level or on your city level, will drill down to the percentage of alcohol that you must have in the disinfectant you use. And so it is important to refer back to those resources.
Awesome. We're all good to wrap up.
Thank you all. And thank you, April.
Thank you, Nanette. And thank you everyone for having us here. Please feel at liberty to connect with me on LinkedIn if you think of a question that you have after we're done today.
Thank you for joining us for the Urban League Fights for You virtual series. Funding for the CARES Act was provided by the Department of Commerce Minority Business Development Agency. To learn more about upcoming virtual series webinars and the Entrepreneurship Center program, please visit NUL.org. Have a great day.